Hello, everyone. How are we all doing today? Didn't stay up too late, I hope. We're all refreshed, bright and early. Right. I am Aaron Langmead. I'm a senior technical artist here at Epic Games, and I want to apologize in advance for the very clickbaity title, creating an open world game with 4,000 strangers. I did consider at one point I invited 4,000 strangers into a Perforce server, and you won't believe what happened next. But that seemed maybe just a step too far. So for those of you who don't know what this talk is about, it is about Project Titan, which is a new sample game that we're currently building. And we've done it in a slightly different way. So the project has the goal of creating an open world, mobile friendly, but scaling all the way up to PS5 sample project. So we'd include all of the common trappings of an open world game and show people how you could go about building that. But we wanted to do it in a very different way, in a very insane way. So that's kind of the pitch that we came up with. So the team that I work with is Sam Bass, our tech designer, Judah Graham, our producer, myself, and Sebastian Hernandez. We basically have a main goal at Epic of creating content that educates and also inspires. So we want stuff that is useful and practical for people, but we also want stuff that people it's going to make them want to build stuff, right? It's going to make them want to create. And we do that in a number of different ways. So we do talks like this, but then also we build sample content and we help out on these really large sample games as well. And one of the things that's always really, really bugged me about working on these things is that it's completely closed off. So we run them internally like a standard game development. You know, we squirrel away for months and months and months, and then out pops this really, really cool tech demo and project. And then like a few months later, people can download it. And maybe we do a couple of talks on it, but we never really show people how the sausage is made, right? From that perspective, we never bring people into that experience. And what I really wanted to do was to get people into this experience so they could see what it's like to actually go about building a project. And the main benefits of those for us is that we can kind of show people, kind of how to go about this. And we can do this by teaching good practice, right? We can bring the people into the project and we can take them through, kind of like our processes, but we can also kind of like knock out bad processes in that, kind of in that time. And then the real benefit for us is that we can really identify kind of like common areas of weakness that we're seeing in the, kind of in the groups that do participate. And try to build content and tailor content so that we can kind of help, kind of resolve those areas of weakness. So that's how the project came about. And we launched Project Titan in March, which was right when GDC was happening, which was a really, really bad idea because we had a lot to do with GDC. And we thought at the time we would get maybe, maybe 1,000, maybe 2,000 if we were lucky, people sign up. And then maybe we get like a couple, 100, maybe a couple of hundred people actually, kind of go through. And then when we went live, we ended up with 4,129 people sign up, which was absolutely terrifying. And then we launched, so we actually opened up the servers at the end of March. And then this happened, which is, I'll just speed up a little bit here. So that's me on the first one. And then we had people coming in, and we got this absolute explosion of content. And from basically this point on, the entire team, I deleted that, was just basically in, I'm not going to call it full-on crisis management, but it was something akin to that, with trying to kind of wrangle and manage all of these people who were kind of building content and building stuff. But the upshot of this is that we ended up with this absolutely incredible environment. So it was 64 square kilometers, so an 8 by 8 kilometer play space. There were 9 different biomes. And by the end of the project, we had just under 19,000 submissions over the 10-week period, which was over 200,000 files added to the project. 11,000 meshes were submitted. We had 7,000 textures, 5,000 materials, 200 skeletal meshes, and 180 Niagara particles. And what was amazing was just that these communities and these groups came together completely organically and formed completely on their own, because we didn't tell people exactly how they had to work together or in what way they had to work together. We just went, you all have to work together. Good luck, right? And then we will come in and we will go, no, don't do that. No, not that way. But we got this absolutely incredible space. So if I can, I'd love to just get a round of applause for the people that worked on this, because this was just an absolute achievement that I can take very little credit for, but I am going to get all the credit because I'm on stage. But yeah, so this was all made by all of these people, complete strangers who gathered together on the internet and actually came together and created something really, really cool and really, really impressive. And on top of that, we had a ton of characters as well. So we ran 5 different disciplines. So we had environment, prop, material, VFX, and our characters. So we had a load of different characters submitted to the project, many of them working to kind of like the same base source skeleton. So we could actually mix and match a lot of the characters on the project as well. I love the work in progress modesty cloth that the orc character's wearing, which is brilliant. So obviously we didn't just launch with a completely empty map, because that would have been true insanity. We did spend a small portion of time in pre-production, though admittedly a lot of that pre-production time was part-time. As I said, we had GDC coming up, which is a really big hitter for us at Epic. So we were working on content for that. We were working on other projects. We had 5.4 coming out. So we kind of had to kind of manage our pre-production in amongst other work. But we kind of focused on a few core things that we knew that we needed to land, or we thought we knew we needed to land, in order to give ourselves kind of the best chances of success. And the first one of those was building an actual large landscape, right? We wanted to have a unified canvas for everyone to work on. Because again, if we just said, here's the empty level, like, have at it, we knew that would just be utter chaos. So we built a large world, but the tools that are available in Unreal don't really scale up that well, right? Ideally, we want something that we can iterate on. We want something non-destructive that we can build. And the tool that's kind of ideal for that is Landmass. But Landmass only really works up to a couple of kilometers in size, because it stores unique layers for every single thing that it's doing. So I built a custom solution that basically divides the entire world into kilometer chunks. And then we had all of these layers that we could do. So the end map was about 600 layers. And we could edit the entire thing in real time. And we used this system to build out the entire world. And we keep it quick. You can kind of see the gray portion that kind of it changes to whenever you're editing. That's basically the area of the world that it's actually updating. So that's how we keep that thing quick, because we don't want to iterate through 600 stamps every single time we make an edit. We just want to update the kind of the area of the map that we're actually changing. So that's kind of how that system ended up working. And then that was really good, because Sam and I, the designer, were able to kind of sit there, and we were just able to kind of build out this entire 8-kilometer landscape. And because we were using external actors, we were able to work on the same map at the same time. We did have to talk to one another, unfortunately, but we managed to get there. So we ended up with this nice kind of like empty open space that people could use, and we kind of built in a load of different biomes so that everyone had lots of different choice on what kind of environment that they wanted to work on. We also needed a character as well, so something for people to kind of test against and to play test with. So we created a new character using the new mover component, which, if you don't know about, is going to replace all of the character movement systems in Unreal, potentially as soon as 5.5, but that may, move a bit later. And then we put all of the trappings of an open world project in there, including wok riding, so you can slide downhill, which was lots of fun. A grapple hook, because no game is complete without some kind of grapple mechanic, in my opinion. And of course, gliding as well, which is just a standard thing that you have in games now. So we added all of those things in just to give people as much kind of freedom to run around and kind of play with the world as possible. And we wanted that kind of like the player to be, kind of like a fun thing for them to kind of do. And then we also added a full day and night cycle as well. This one's a bit slow, so I'll just run through it a little bit. So that way, again, we had a nice, easy way of artists checking their environments against lots of different lighting environments. So they could run through the entire time of day spectrum, either in editor or in game, and kind of run through that entire thing. And then the hardest problem to solve was how the hell do we actually go about sharing this project and letting people collaborate? Luckily, we have a pretty good relationship with Perforce and AWS. So we reached out to both of them and said, hey, we've got this insane idea. Would you like to help us out? And they went, hell yes! And they absolutely jumped on it. So Perforce provided us with what was at first a 2,000-seat server license for our project, which soon moved up to a 3,000-seat server license, then a 4,000-seat server license, and then finally a 5,000-seat server license. Had to keep going back and be like, hey, so the project's doing it's doing a little bit better than we thought it was. Could we up the license amount? And more importantly, they gave us just these absolutely awesome support guys who literally saved our backsides on numerous occasions and just made sure that everything was up and running and kind of running smoothly. I lost track of the number of times they had to reset someone's password for them, but eternally grateful for them for that one. And then AWS basically gave us enough Amazon Web credit for us to run the entire project on the cloud. So we had kind of our one main Perforce server set up in London alongside 3 proxies, which we staggered around the world so that people would be able to download the content quickly and effectively. And the great thing about the proxies as well is that we can really, really easily spin up new ones in different regions. So that really helped kind of make sure that everyone could download the projects quickly. We also had Horde set up on AWS as well to do automated HLOD builds, which was actually super cheap. We didn't realize how cheap that was to actually do at the time until we started running through them. But we can set up an automatic HLOD build for as little as $8 a day. Depending on the size of world you're building, that cost does go up. It ended up, I think, you can go all the way up to like $140 if you're building an absolutely massive space and you just need more memory access for that. And then what was really useful as well is that we had this Grafana board set up, which you can see is this lovely graph over here, which uses Prometheus, which is this thing built into Perforce that you can use to kind of output all of the kind of like the stats that it's running. And this was brilliant because it let us identify potential problems with the Perforce server as we were building. And then it also told us what the hell had gone wrong if the server had ever crashed, which only happened, I think, 3 or 4 times. And it was a very easy thing to reboot. And then in total, we spent about $22,000 for the entire 10 weeks, for the entire dev team to be able to push and pull the project. 90% of that cost, if not more, was actually with Cloud DDC. So Cloud DDC is one of those things where it's insanely powerful. It means that when we opened the project, it just opened, right? Like there was barely any wait time to do it. It didn't have to do any pre-compiling. It didn't have to do any shader compilation. The project would just open up and you'd be able to go straight away. And then it just made things so quick, so quick. But it does have a fairly significant cost attached to that as well. On top of that, we introduced a couple of extra features as well. So we had a thing called 24-hour checkout limit, which would automatically revert anyone's checkout after a 24-hour period. This was a problem. It was a real double-edged sword. I do not recommend doing this on your studio. We absolutely needed it. Because we had a load of people coming in, we didn't know who they were. They could check out a ton of files and then leave. We didn't have that direct communication line set up. So we knew that we needed to set something like this up. Otherwise, we would end up with just constantly having to manually revert people's work. And then they may also just reconcile and submit it back again anyway. So we knew that we needed a good solution for this. So we ended up getting an automated 24-hour checkout. So it would automatically revert the content. And then we had a bunch of other things as well. So we had, kind of restricted assets to UAsset only, mainly so the server didn't turn into a movie streaming service. And kind of stuck to the launcher build of the engine as well, just to keep things really simple. So with all of that kind of base content that we had, we moved on to the Art Jam portion. So this ran for 10 weeks. Like I said, we had 4,129 challenges. And if you're building an open world with 4,000 strangers, you can expect the first 2,000 to not show up, which is thank Christ for that, because managing 4,000 people would have been an absolute nightmare. But then we had pretty good retention on that. So we had 1,490 people who joined the 2,000 people who joined the Discord, then went through and made a workspace and made some kind of submission. Usually only once before going, oh, this is a lot of hard work, I'm not going to do this. And then from that, we had about just under 600 people actively, kind of contributing to the project on some level, whether that was doing a couple of weeks of, kind of like regular submits, or basically from the start to the end, just absolutely making it seemingly their entire life. We had people, kind of really going full bore and making some cool stuff. And then our change list count is pretty standard for what you'd expect to see for kind of like a game jam or a kind of like any kind of like project period. We had the kind of like the initial eagerness, and then we had like the 1,000, 1,000, 1,000 increments of the kind of the midway through. And then we had the last week, like just submitting as much stuff as possible to the actual project itself. And then that kind of led us on to kind of like our really, kind of our biggest challenge, right, which is directing all of these people who are coming in. And to do this, we did a number of things. So we created a brief. So this was our brief. We kept it brief. We wanted to try and keep it as kind of simple as possible while still giving people some good guidelines, because ultimately we wanted to give the artists who are doing the project as much creative freedom as possible, while still making sure that they were creating a single cohesive space. That, of course, didn't stop someone from adding a fleet of Star Destroyers to the project world, which I would argue is not quite pre-industrial era. But, agree to disagree. I deleted them. It was fine. And then, whereas most projects would have, kind of like quite a prolific mood board with all of the kind of like, kind of the inspirations and the regions they wanted to go for, we didn't do any of that. So we actually just gave them tutorials. So we found tutorials that were, kind of indicative of the art style, that had good practice and kind of good, kind of good build methodologies in there. And we reached out to those artists and said, hey, can we share these? And they said, yes. And then we shared about 7 or 8 different tutorials that were like, kind of, this is the kind of art style we're going for. This is how these artists approached it. This is how you can go about doing the same. And then on top of that, we produced a significant amount of documentation as well for people when they first came in, and had weekly reminders for people to please read the documentation. I think you can see where I'm going with this. We had a material art guide which told people how to format their textures correctly and how to set up using the base material that we provided. We had a technical art guide showing them how to correctly structure their levels. And we had a character art guide showing people how to go about breaking down their character into different components so that we could use it as kind of like a, kind of a switch and swap situation. And then on top of that, we also came up with a naming and folder guide, I think about a week in, to try and tell people how to correctly name their assets. We also provided them with an Unreal installation guide and also a Perforce setup guide. And based on the questions that we had in the Discord, it was clear that nobody read the documentation, which was a massive surprise. We also had some wandering critics as well, and these were far more effective. So we basically brought them in to wander the game world and give feedback where they found it. We had them on the live stream, to kind of basically sit down and just critique all of the content coming in. And we also had a channel as well where people could post stuff and they would get feedback both from the community at large and also these lovely people here. But by far the most effective thing that we did was the training content. So over the course of the 10 weeks, we produced about 57 training videos, which were a mix of small tutorials that are about 5 to 10 minutes to full critique sessions where we would go in and we'd select a bunch of work that had common problems and we would talk through those issues and tell people how to resolve them. And this was by far the best kind of method that we had for actually getting improved content in the project. The change that we saw in the game world and the characters and the effects every time we did a video like this was absolutely staggering. And a great example of this was our foliage. So we had a lot of forests coming into the world that were just awful. So they would be incredibly densely packed. The kind of ground foliage level would be about 8 feet above the player. So you'd be running through just like walls of green and not able to see anything whatsoever. So I did a video on kind of like building foliage and designing it to kind of create nice volumetric looks while working well with Nanite and reducing overdraw. And Sam did a video on designing forests. So actually kind of like actually sitting there and actually designing out the space. And we went from that to this and this, right? So we had just absolutely incredible change every time we did these videos. And that's why we kind of pushed so hard on them throughout the project, was because we were seeing so much improvement every time we put them out. So one of the big things that I do want to focus on, because I'm just that kind of guy, are areas of weakness, right? So these were kind of really common things that we saw, kind of not with every single artist that was on the project, but were common things and common themes that we were seeing with the artists who joined the project and produced content. The first was building with Nanite. This was, kind of really hard to get people into it, and I was a bit surprised by how few people still knew about Nanite and the Nanite workflow. Kind of it's 2 years old now, which in kind of game dev terms is quite old. But we still had people building with the old methodology, and we had a lot of people on the Discord server kind of spreading false information with being like, you've imported this asset and it's 200,000 triangles. What are you doing? Bake hello, Poly. And we'd be like, no, it's fine. 200,000 triangles is fine, as long as it's not like that small. So, kind of we would see lots of things like this, right, where we'd have very visible faceting on rounded objects. And again, like really conservative triangle counts on some elements. And then they'd enable like nanite tessellation on another element. And you'd be like, well, this is quite disproportionate. So this was kind of like one of those things that it took a really long time and to try and get people to be like, this is the new workflow. This is how you should be working now if you want to work with Nanite. And you need to kind of get to that realization that actually like subdivisions are so easy for the engine to reduce down on its own that you just don't need to worry about it anymore. You don't need to worry about like kind of trying to get the lowest approximation of a curved surface. You can just subdivide it until it's smooth. And we can figure it out in Editor. So you can kind of see you can really kind of see that staggered thing on there. And then conversely, kind of we'd have artists talking about low triangle count, which doesn't really matter as much anymore. And then in the same breath, they would put 60 skeletal meshes into a single space and put animations on them, some of which were over 1 gigabyte in size. and then add all shadow casting lights into that world. So really trying to get people to, again, like kind of, this was one of the challenges where it was technically, it's an ArtStation challenge. So for those previous challenges, it's very much about just the visual end result. As long as you get it looking good in the still and maybe a fly through, it's fine. But where we're actually trying to build a full, kind of playable open world game, you can't just go throwing lights, or in one case, someone put in 30 cable components just underneath a dock so that they could have nice swinging ropes in there. And you're like, disable plugin, mover. No, it was done. So we had things like that. And then also just like insane number of material instances on assets. We had, with the VFX, most people who were building VFX weren't putting in an effect type, which means that there was no disable draw distance on any of the particles coming into the scene. So if you have a lot of the world loaded in, like this hotspot right here is this particle effect, which is just a little tiny like firefly around a lantern. So trying to get, kind of VFX artists to actually go through and set up like a unified effect type system and then make sure that those were going in was another challenge to try and really get people into that kind of habit of putting that stuff in. And then a lot of stuff is, which is, I would say is partly our fault at Epic, but also, kind of something that people do need to be aware of is some of the new tech, which has kind of its own quirks and uniqueness. So things like virtual shadow mapping. We really need to be careful about our world position offset disable distance, so making sure that we're disabling content on distance. Personally, I think we really just need to have like a default number that everything responds to and then everything overlaps, but that's not what we have at the moment. So we need to make sure that anything that has world position offset applied to it is disabling that past a certain distance so that we're not invalidating the shadow cache on any of that data. And a lot of this optimization and stuff that we're doing sometimes doesn't actually matter for the end game, but it does matter a lot if you want to try and keep the editor performant, if you want to try and keep people able to load more in and being able to kind of actually work effectively. So this is stuff that, again, like at the moment, I've got the entire world, the entire 8x8 kilometer world loaded in, which obviously we'd never do in game. But the longer that we can do that for, and the longer we can load in large chunks without having to go down to that really granular game level world partition grid, the more quickly that we can work and the better that we can work. Tiling and trim materials was another massive one as well. We thought that every time I've worked on a level or an environment, you expect 70-80% of that environment to be populated with trim and tiling materials. And I blame Substance Painter for this in its entirety, because the vast majority of the content that we got in that were textures and materials were kind of baked standalone textures that were only usable on a single asset. This was really, really common, and it happened really, really frequently on assets that just should not have used a unique texture geometry. So this is the asset that we had, which looks like it should be a tiling material. It's got some other issues with it as well. And then you'd look at it and you'd see just an automatic unwrap. They upped the texture size so that they could get the resolution that they'd needed. And then, hey presto, Substance Painter just kind of works around it for you. But really, kind of like, and we saw this again, like we saw this a lot. So this asset again, which just looks like, again, they've just applied the tiling material in Substance Painter and then done some minor tweaks to it and then output the end result. So getting people back into that habit of doing tiling materials and trim materials and really pushing on that, I think is something that we really need to kind of focus on again. Playtesting was another one. We did not see anywhere near as much playtesting as needed. And this was very, very evident when we would be playtesting and we would find an area that had just either no collision on it whatsoever or one massive collision body on it that you could just stand on top of. And you go, okay, Well, you've never ran around this space before. But this was really important. Again, like playtesting is just this standard thing that you do all the time in game development. But it was really hard to try and get the artists on the project to actually stop, play your space, check your scale, check if your interior has enough room for your camera and your player at the same time, make sure that your doors are big enough and you can get through them easily. All of these really common things that I think a lot of more experienced developers take for granted was something that a lot of people just didn't do. They kind of just focused on it as that art piece. Character artists, I'm just going to just like broad sweeping problem with character artists. So over half of the characters that we had for Project Titan were submitted in the last week of the project, right? That is because the character artists on the project spent their entire time just sat in the sculpting application, right? And they never iterated. They never brought their character through. And this was a massive problem because they weren't submitting content in any visible way. It made it really hard for us to identify and call out problems and to give them feedback and to help them because they spent so much time inside third-party applications and never taking their character through. So whenever I'm, kind of managing character artists, I want that block out and I want it rigged and I want it in the engine, right, as soon as I possibly can. Because even if it's just placeholder, kind of skinning, like it doesn't matter that it looks janky as hell. I need it in so that we can start iterating on that. And character artists, again, a lot of this is due to the way that the character art pipeline is quite fragmented. But the vast majority of them just spent the entire time, kind of sculpting and then retopoing and, okay, I'll get it into the editor when I get to the last stage. They saw that as a last step rather than an iterative step throughout the project. And as a result, we did end up with a massive number of problems coming from the character art folder. We had chunking enabled on the project, again, because we have the target of releasing this as a mobile-friendly sample, so we need to be able to chunk it. And that means that you can't have repeated names. And again, we had that kind of disconnect with character artists, and many of them were just bringing their textures as just like diffuse or D or base color or something like that, rather than going, well, actually, no, I need to name this because I'm bringing it in with, 500 other people who are adding content to the world, and diffuse is not a very helpful name. Building big was another big one as well. Pun intended. So trying to get people to build past the kind of 4K texel resolution that people are comfortable with was a real challenge. And actually, the vast majority of people missed out this entire step, which is really, really vital because it's actually the proper ground that you're going to be exploring in the game. And they just went straight to set dressing. So they kind of built out the little, kind of trees and some houses and little pieces for that, and then kind of place them in the world without thinking about the larger context. So getting people to work at a kind of a bigger scale and think about how they need to design their assets and build their set pieces so that they can kind of build at this larger scale was a real challenge as well. That leads me on to my problems, because it's only fair that if I'm going to kind of be mean to the people who did a ton of work for us over the last 10 weeks, it's only fair that I then critique myself as well. So our biggest problem that we had was a lack of base content. Again, we relied more on the documentation side, and we just shouldn't have done that. We should have had far better folder structures in place. We should have had far more base materials in place that people could just have used. We should have had examples in all of the folders that we put in so that people knew the structure more organically just by picking that content up. Because while people aren't really happy to read through, kind of a 6,000 word document, they would be happy to kind of like navigate the folder and explore it and then pick up that structure more organically. So we really should have kind of built a lot more of that stuff in at the start of the project, especially with PCGs. We had a lot of people building PCG graphs who really shouldn't have been building PCG graphs. Kind of really we should have just had a lot of that PCG content built in, so that people could just inject their own content and their own assets into it, and then we're kind of managing that spawning process so that we can keep it under control. And then finally, we just got seriously lucky with this. We had just these incredible mods who kind of signed up basically day one and were with us from day one till the end of the project, and managed the massive number of people in the Discord server who were asking question after question. And ultimately, what most of the mods actually just did was just read the documentation and then tell people what the documentation said when they asked a question. But nonetheless, they did a huge amount of problem solving for us. Cluecool especially I don't think he slept worryingly for the project, but would answer, kind of loads and loads of questions and really help us through all of this stuff. And also, we just got lucky. We didn't think we were going to get Perforce support, but we did. And boy, did we need it, because on the night before the project was supposed to shut down, we ended up with a B-tree corruption, which if you know version control and you know servers, then you know that that's a problem, that thing has happened. But thankfully, we were back up in under an hour, or in just over an hour, I think, and we'd lost an hour of history. So our previous kind of history save before that had been 24 hours previous. So we lost barely anything, and that was purely thanks to the Perforce support team coming in and really saving our bacon on that stuff. But ultimately, we just got lucky in the people that we got, right? We genuinely, we had so many contingencies in place to manage. Anyone heard of TTP? I don't want to say it out loud. No? Go Google TTP in game development terms and you'll know what I mean. But we expected the TTP on this project to be within seconds, right? Not days. And actually, it was something we never had to deal with. We had a few people bringing in some Sketchfab content that was marked as free, which doesn't mean that you can bring it into another project that's going to get distributed. And we had to kind of go in and delete that. But outside of that, we had just this insane level of professionalism on the project. We had just these people going in and just absolutely being 100% dedicated, taking this 100% seriously, and just building all of this awesome stuff, right? And we genuinely didn't expect it, to the point where it kind of, renewed my faith in the internet a little bit, because you kind of expect it just to be kind of a bit of a cesspool sometimes. But actually, we had this people come together and form friendship groups and, kind of form these teams and work together and iterate through. And every single person took feedback brilliantly and, kind of really took everything on board. And we just ended up with this amazing, kind of end result. So with that, that's my talk. Any questions?